What does a battlefield commander do when the traditional rules of civilized warfare evaporate into thin air before his very eyes? General George S. Patton, Jr. found himself staring directly into that exact moral abyss during the frozen, desperate winter of 1944. A ruthless German general had just issued a chilling, blood-soaked order to his soldiers, commanding them to execute every single captured and wounded American soldier on sight without mercy. This was not a routine tactical challenge. It was an open, monstrous provocation that demanded an immediate, devastating response from the legendary American commander. If Patton ignored the atrocity, he risked destroying the morale of his entire army. If he retaliated blindly, he might become the very monster he fought. What followed would redefine the brutal limits of vengeance on the Western Front, and his unforgiving answer would reshape the remaining days of the war. Before we uncover the exact, terrifying nature of Patton's retaliation, consider how easily the thread of battlefield discipline can snap when men are pushed past human limits. If you want to understand how real commanders navigate the darkest corners of human conflict without losing their own humanity, subscribe to our channel right now. By hitting the like button and leaving a comment below, you help ensure these vital, intense historical truths are never forgotten. This specific story reveals that the line between a hero and a villain is often written in the blood of the decisions made in absolute secret. Now, we must look closely at the frozen pressure cooker where this ultimate test of absolute military wills first began to simmer. The bitter, unyielding winter had already turned the Ardennes forest into a vast, white graveyard where men froze to death before they could even pull their triggers. Inside this freezing hellscape, the sudden German winter offensive caught the Allied forces completely off guard, stretching their thin lines to the absolute breaking point. At the spearhead of this brutal German assault was a hardened SS commander who believed that sheer, unadulterated terror was a legitimate weapon of war. He viewed the American forces not as respected adversaries, but as weak, soft targets that needed to be utterly crushed and psychologically broken. To achieve this, he formally issued a top-secret command to his advancing panzer divisions: spare no one, take no prisoners, and eliminate the wounded. This monstrous directive was not a random act of battlefield madness. It was a calculated, deliberate psychological strategy designed to trigger absolute panic across the Allied lines. Near a quiet Belgian crossroads, the horrific reality of this new order manifested in a flurry of cold-blooded gunfire that left dozens of unarmed Americans dead in the snow. Word of the horrifying massacre spread through the freezing trenches like wildfire, moving faster than any official military dispatch ever could. The American soldiers suddenly realized they were no longer fighting a standard military campaign. They were trapped in an active war of total extermination. Fear, heavy and suffocating, began to settle over the troops, threatening to break the fragile fighting spirit that Patton had spent months carefully building. General George Patton was a complex man driven by a fierce, ancient code of warrior honor, believing deeply in destiny, aggressive warfare, and strict discipline. Yet, beneath his polished ivory-handled pistols and his carefully manufactured, tough-as-nails persona lay a commander who felt a profound, almost paternal duty to his men. When the initial fragmented reports of the cold-blooded executions finally reached his mobile headquarters, the temperature inside the command tent dropped instantly. His staff watched in dead silence as the general's face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury that signaled an impending storm. Patton knew that if his men began to panic, the entire line would collapse, handing Nazi Germany a massive, potentially catastrophic victory. The pressure on Patton was immense, coming not just from the advancing enemy, but from the highest levels of the Allied Supreme Command itself. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was constantly watching, demanding that Patton maintain absolute strategic control while managing a volatile, rapidly changing front. Patton was walking a delicate political and military tightrope, knowing that a single misstep could result in a court-martial or a permanent stain on his historic legacy. He needed a way to stop the enemy's psychological terror campaign instantly without allowing his own army to descend into chaotic, lawless savagery. The clock was ticking loudly, and the entire fate of the European theater seemed to hang precariously on his next immediate tactical move. As the heavy snow continued to fall, Patton quietly gathered his top division commanders in a dimly lit, makeshift bunker to deliver a highly unusual directive. He did not issue a standard written military order that could be easily intercepted or later used against him by political enemies in Washington. Instead, he looked his men directly in the eyes and delivered a spoken command that would alter the nature of the entire winter campaign. He told them that the enemy had broken the sacred rules of war, and therefore, the enemy had forfeited their right to standard treatment. But Patton's true strategy was far more calculating, dangerous, and deeply psychological than his commanders could have ever anticipated. The immediate consequence of Patton's secret briefing was a sharp, perceptible shift in the aggressive behavior of the American Third Army on the front lines. The previous fear that had paralyzed the troops suddenly transformed into a cold, driving hunger for absolute battlefield justice. American artillery units began pounding German positions with an unprecedented, relentless intensity that left the enemy with absolutely no room to breathe. Patton was actively driving his men forward at a punishing, breakneck pace, completely ignoring the hazardous weather conditions and the mounting casualties. Yet, the German general who had started this spiral of violence remained safely entrenched behind his lines, completely unaware of the trap closing in. Before we witness the explosive climax of this personal vendetta, we must pause to consider the heavy moral weight carried by those who command armies. If you are captivated by the intense psychological duels that dictate the outcomes of world-changing conflicts, take a brief second to subscribe to our channel. Sharing this video and engaging in the comments section below directly supports our deep dive into the hidden, unvarnished realities of wartime leadership. The most critical turning point of this entire confrontation was about to unfold on a battlefield covered in thick ice and red snow. The American advance was moving with the unstoppable momentum of a massive avalanche, steadily pushing the elite German panzer divisions back into a tight corner. Patton was constantly on the move, appearing at the absolute front lines to personally ensure that his aggressive, unyielding spirit was being executed perfectly. He deliberately cut off the enemy's escape routes, forcing the German units into small, isolated pockets where they had to fight or die. The German soldiers, who had initially operated with supreme confidence, now found themselves facing an American army that refused to grant them any quarter. The hunters had officially become the hunted, and the German commander's brilliant terror strategy was rapidly backfiring on his own men. A pivotal turning point arrived when a large contingent of elite German troops tried to surrender to an American unit that had lost friends in the initial massacre. The tension on the field was thick enough to cut with a knife as the Americans leveled their weapons at the unarmed, pleading Germans. This was the exact moment where Patton's secret philosophy was put to the ultimate, terrifying test of real-world application. The American officers on the ground had to decide whether to uphold the rules of civilization or execute the unspoken promise of total revenge. What happened in those brief, agonizing seconds would determine the moral legacy of the American army in Europe forever. The situation reached a fever pitch when Patton received an official report indicating that some of his units had indeed taken the law into their own hands. Rather than reacting with shock or launching an immediate investigation, Patton did something that stunned his closest administrative staff members. He quietly ordered the reports to be buried, stating that the enemy should have known better than to fight against men who had seen their brothers murdered. He believed that a harsh, unyielding response was the only language the ruthless SS command structure could truly understand. This calculated indifference was Patton's true revenge, creating a wall of terror that completely shattered the German will to fight. The absolute climax of this bitter conflict occurred when the Allied forces finally broke through the German lines, forcing a massive, chaotic retreat. The German general who had ordered the slaughter of the wounded found himself stripped of his elite divisions, his grand strategy entirely ruined by Patton's relentless counteroffensive. When the final battle dust settled, Patton personally toured the liberated territory, viewing the grim remnants of the enemy army that had dared to defy the rules of war. He had not merely defeated the German offensive, he had utterly annihilated the specific units responsible for the atrocities, delivering an unforgiving, comprehensive vengeance. The answer Patton gave to the German challenge was written in the total, uncompromising destruction of the enemy's most feared fighting forces. In the somber epilogue of this brutal winter campaign, the true cost of Patton's uncompromising methods became a subject of quiet, intense debate among top military officials. The German general who issued the infamous order was eventually captured and brought to trial before a war crimes tribunal to face absolute justice. Patton himself survived the war only to die shortly after in a tragic car accident, cementing his status as a legendary, deeply controversial warrior. The secret orders, the buried reports, and the fierce retaliation in the snow became part of the dark, unspoken folklore of World War II. Ultimately, Patton's unforgiving revenge proved that in the darkest hours of human history, victory often requires a leader willing to walk through hell to protect his men. The legacy of that frozen clash in the Ardennes continues to echo through the modern halls of military academies around the globe to this very day. It serves as a stark, chilling reminder that when the traditional guardrails of civilization break down, the response must be swift, absolute, and undeniably fierce. Patton did not choose the path of cruelty, but he recognized that true weakness on the battlefield would only invite further, more devastating atrocities against his troops. By meeting absolute terror with an unyielding, unbreakable wall of tactical fire, he preserved the momentum needed to dismantle the entire Nazi regime once and for all. The story remains a complex, haunting study in raw power, showing that sometimes justice does not wear a crown, but carries ivory-handled pistols into the snow.